Hello, Bradley.
Hello, how are you, Piyush?
I'm good. How are you?
All right. Nice to see you.
Uh,
How have you been doing?
I'm I'm good. Just a sec.
Okay. Ah, there we go. I forgot. Have you been in the meeting before, or is this your first meeting? Or
No, I've been at the meeting before,
okay,
and I haven't been joining the meeting since last 2 or 3 occasions because I was in the middle of my examination.
okay. Well, I just wanted to check. Yeah. I mean, I don't know who else. I know Jesse's supposed to be here, but he might be here in a couple minutes. And then we'll get started.
Yeah.
Okay. What have you been up to recently?
Uh,
What have you been doing in the last few months or so?
so since last 20 days or so, I've been in the middle of a couple of exams. So uh, I actually had to present something. We usually have a final year presentation in the college. So in like since last 10 days, I have been working on that, the final project, and before that, I was having my final examination. So
Okay.
And yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing since last 20 days or so.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get to go to Neuromatch 3 at all?
Yeah, I actually attended about 10 or 20 talks, and I didn't get much of time to attend all of them. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's.
and
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
before that I attended Stanford HAI conference. It was pretty amazing for me. Like uh, it was kind of a combination of neuroscience and human-centric AI. If you have attended it, I think you actually, yeah, we were talking about that on Slack channel as well. So
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah.
are, yeah,
Yeah. It was a pretty good event. So this
yeah,
week we had a bunch of things going on in Slack. I don't know if you caught any of it. Like,
not yet actually.
yeah, we had there was the main conference which was in Montreal, and they had the it's like Neuro AI. So it was a interdisciplinary mix of AI and neuroscience and all that. So that was pretty good. We also had some discussions about sort of what we want to do in terms of organizing content in the lab. So we've been actually Jesse started a GitHub organization. I don't know if you belong to that.
Yeah, I actually checked that out. I am actually the part of it. I
Okay.
haven't contributed yet, so but I have checked out the whole projects, what we're gonna do and what we have done and what we are planning to do and the whole task force. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. So we yeah. So we've been working on putting that together. We've been talking about like taking notes, and I've compiled a lot of the past lab meetings into like a directory. So that's in the Saturday morning NeuroSim group. Uh, okay, Anson's here, and so that's all sort of for people who may make the meeting occasionally or want to go back and look at the meetings in the past. And we're going to have various action items there and put them in place. Um, and then hopefully, we won't lose a lot of, because we talk about a lot of things every week, but we don't want to lose a lot of that because we tend to lose a lot of it, I think. Kind of
Yeah.
goes into nowhere.
I think it
Um,
happens to everyone. Like,
yeah,
but the research part, like they tend to forget things. So it's a good thing to keep track of them.
yeah. So we have that, and then we have the uh, yeah. So we have the organization. We have this sort of categorization of content. We've also talked about having a list of different things we can submit to, like conferences and other things that are upcoming. So like a big table of those things put together. And yeah. Well, Anson,
Hello.
Good morning. Hello.
hi, how are you?
Ooh, I look. I forgot when one of my final products was due and had to quickly get it done the last few days, but which was stressful. Besides that, I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad that's over.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's I don't know. I used to have dreams where I would like have a course that I never attended, like during the term. Like I registered for it, and then like I'd forget about it until like it was almost over, and then it would be like I obviously
I
failed the
think that
course.
I think I've had that dream before.
Yeah. How's your that AI Alife paper coming?
So that was the side project. So I had to quickly. I don't think I did I think I want to go back to it for sure, but if only for the sake of having needing to throw it together to turn it in. It was interesting to look over the history. I did end up doing a decent amount of that this week. I ended up looking at the history, and I looked at Alife 2020. I didn't look at the presentations, but I looked over the themes and compared it to Badeau, an American philosopher, in Alife, 14 Open Problems. I ended up looking at well, the history relating to how cellular automata concurrently evolved with cybernetic contributions in the 80s, and then neural nets in the late 80s and 90s, and how that led up to a kind of blurring out into interdisciplinary mainstream approaches, like just released the idea that like 2 decades ago, computational models were like strictly within the realm of Alife, but are now mainstream biology, stood out to me. Let me see. I think I want to go back for sure to go over a few specific computational models and like detail out how cellular automata have evolved throughout the years. But I got a decent overview, if only because it was too. But it's definitely something I want to return to and refine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting area. In my other group, we've worked with cellular automata in the past. So, I mean, there's basically it's you have the basic models, and then you have these rules that people have uncovered using just by running them and using different rule sets to evolve different patterns. So, Stephen Wolfram has published a huge book on this where he's defined like over 100 rules, and they're supposed to reflect things in nature. So you have these rule sets like interact with your neighbor at a certain rate or something like that, and then you end up with these patterns that you might see them, for example, in seashells, where you look at a seashell and it has these stripes, or it has little checkerboard patterns or whatever, and that's supposed to be something you can evolve with a cellular automata. And so, it's somewhat controversial whether that's actually reflective of what's actually happening in nature. Like, for example, does a seashell really execute this rule, or does it just look like it? And so there's this assumption, it's like sort of a universality principle that says, that there's this computational equivalence between something that you would create in a CA and something that you would see in life. That, there's nothing really special about biology. It's just that biology is executing these rules. And you could see that in any system, like a physical system or a computational system or a biological system. And so, that's pretty difficult to sort of master or like to kind of describe neatly. And then you have these things like these self-replicating machines. I don't know if you've ever heard of those.
I just think of what was the Game of Life, Conway's Game of Life.
Yeah. Well, that's the Game of Life, which is
Oh,
interesting, in and of itself. But there are these other things that von Neumann created called self-replicating machines, and they're basically these large-scale cellular automata that evolve according to rules, and they self-assemble and they put together, this huge pattern. They're a lot more obscure. I mean, it's basically the idea of, von Neumann, he put together a lot of ideas about computation, but he also kind of dabbled in artificial life in that area. So there's that area. And then, of course, there's Conway's Game of Life, which is, I think, criminally underexplored in terms of its potential. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I think like long term, I'm definitely orientated towards like how you could represent that kind of input output based allostatic kinds, and how that is represented across different scales, distinct scales. But that just you can continue. That was just what thought Martin's head.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think I'm just taking notes here, but actually, it sounds like there's a really nice sort of maybe relationship between Conway's Game of Life and allostasis. Not really sure what that is, but I don't know if maybe people have written on it. I'm not sure, but
I've seen stuff about like basically in Conway's Game of Life, you have these emergent patterns that are self-replicating, that geometric patterns that are self-replicating through some kind of perturbation that's consistent between its one shape and another shape. I think the idea that perturbations could be could be seen as external inputs to an internal collection of, I guess, stuff that'd be analogous to stored perceptual, or I guess stored states in general would be interesting. I think even just applying like, I wonder how, like, I don't know enough about these to know whether this should pay off or not, but I came across was Igor Alexander's Principles of Consciousness during our research, and I think applying that to Conway's Game of Life would be interesting in like a non-neuronal non-neuronal cognition way, just like in a, I don't know how rigorous you could make this, but in a way where you could computationally represent the different elements Alexander listed off with as analogous to particular computational mathematical aspects of Conway Game of Life systems and categorizations of them. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think my math thoughts are strong enough for that, to be honest. But I'd be interested. I've seen people do stuff like that. Like
yeah.
I think I might need to review. I might need to learn topology.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think there's a mathematical barrier there to really kind of getting deep into the analysis of cellular automata. It's not like with algorithms you need to have something about analyzing algorithms, and they do have that area of study. But like, yeah, to really like analyze a cellular automata, you need to have like some pretty decent background in math. But I think there are ways. I think there are tools maybe that would help you do that. I don't really know what's the state of the art out there, but
I've seen people do like sort of classifications and like higher level topology and yeah, so it's currently beyond me. But yeah, it's long term. I definitely want to look into it.
oh, good, yeah. That sounds pretty good. I'm glad that paper. I mean, at least it's starting you out in a good direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it's definitely something where like it didn't turn out how I wanted, but it's still, even in its current form, it gave me a good overview of like spatterings of large general themes in the field and my and a basis to something more advanced that I want to return back to.
yeah. I know that Jesse has been talking about we were talking a little bit in Slack this week about, well, a lot of things, but and I told Piyush about the main conference, which was like a neuro and AI hybrid conference. But we also had a couple of papers in the different Slack channels. They're sort of all over the place because we talked about putting it in one place, but we end up putting it in different places. But I didn't think we had anything on cellular automata, but I'll look for something this week. But we were talking about the Cognition Futures project a bit and how that might evolve. And so I think it's interesting. I mentioned last week that Jesse started his outline at the 2000s, and of course there's a lot going on before the 2000s. And then we had a little side discussion about different people who, like, there are people, I think he brought up Poincaré and also Frederick Hayek, who are both people who aren't really known as like cognitive scientists by any stretch of the imagination, but they wrote things on cognition. So I said there's probably some room in there to put in like how people outside of traditional, what we think of cognitive science, what they had to say about cognition, and then linking that into sort of what people have studied more formally in cognitive science, and see if those ideas, maybe they've run parallel to the field, maybe they have some, maybe they have some use for the field going forward. So I think it's very, like I think cellular automata fit into that in, some interesting ways. I don't really know, but it might be worth like looking into the history of cellular automata a bit, and having like this, seeing sort of how it squares away with like cognition. And then of course cognition also leads into maybe like the definition of living systems or adaptive systems, as you'll find there is a lot of overlap in that, especially like in the Alife conferences. I know that in Alife, there's Jesse. Hi, Jesse. I just got your message on, so there, there's a track in the Alife conference, History and Philosophy of Alife, and it hasn't been as active in the recent past. Like in the 2020 conference, it wasn't particularly active, but there are people who've written papers on sort of like this history of like defining life, and then that kind of goes into this area of autopoiesis and cognition, which I know Anson. You've mentioned Varela.
Yeah.
And so there's that whole area that I think is worth thinking about. cognition in the cognition futures context, not necessarily just like as like an outside thing, but like something that sits on the edge of cognitive science. So it isn't really mainstream cognitive science, but it really isn't not cognitive science either, you know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it's I couldn't find a description of why it's not like considered mainstream, but I wonder if it's just because it's not easily currently commercializable, like say deep learning is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
which thing wasn't? Hi, sorry, I'm very late, and I'll be back to what was the not popular thing that you just said?
research into autopoiesis and the cellular automata.
So why is it that it's not part of cognitive science, like mainstream cognitive science? Like, you know, like we think, well, machine learning isn't really mainstream cognitive science, but everyone pays attention to it.
Well, I think you could also just ask. I think the umbrella question is why isn't it? I would kind of, frankly, I would say cognitive science isn't really mainstream. But I mean that's kind of a debate. I'll say more about that later. I will be on camera shortly. I'm kind of just making a lot of stuff work right now, and I'll say more soon. So I don't mean to interrupt anything. Sorry, but
that's fine. Yeah.
I will be here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Anson and I were just talking about his project on artificial intelligence and artificial life. Piyush, did you have anything you wanted to add on that, or did you have any comments?
No, I actually, while you were talking, I was checking out Cellular Automata. I actually didn't know what it is. So I found it really interesting, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I actually was thinking about what Anson was talking about. So I think it's a really good idea, and maybe we should actually work on that as well. When you were saying like we should, it won't be much of an cognitive neuroscience field, but we can actually apply this on some of the projects that we were discussing on Slack channel. I think.
Yeah, we could.
I don't know. I actually look at it much. I don't have much information on this.
Yeah. It's always we always have that in this group. You know, people will hear an idea they've not heard of, and we have to go. But well, we can have a discussion on Slack. I'll try to post some things on it. I think it's a good thing to at least think about, become familiar with, and so that's an interesting. I think if you're watching on YouTube, for example, it's worth looking into it. I'm going to try, when I put together the Twitter thread for today, I'll put some links to some of the sort of the base cellular automata references. And there is, like I said, there is a barrier to understanding, because they look very nice, they look very neat, and they run like these simulations. But, the analysis is the harder part. Understanding how they work is one thing, why they do what they do is quite another. So and I said in our other group, we've done like pattern recognition with them and other types of things. So they're not part of the typical machine learning pantheon that that you would see, like I said, at a machine learning conference. But they can be useful in different ways, especially if you're looking at spatial patterns of things. So, they'll use them, I think, in the talk that I gave on agent-based models. And that should be, I don't know if I've put that up in our directory of talks, but I did a talk on agent-based models a couple months ago. And I kind of hit on cellular automata, sort of sideways glancing blow at cellular automata then, and I didn't mention it really, get too deeply into it, but they're basically a form of agent-based model. So, when I talked about showing segregation model, that's basically a cellular automata. So, like, the idea is you have this grid of cells, and each cell is an agent, and then the agent interacts with its neighbors. And then, depending on what its neighbors do, that cell behaves accordingly. You could say, well, each agent is going to take in a majority of its neighbors' inputs and behave like a majority of its neighbors, or it could do the opposite behavior. And so, if you have this in parallel across this grid, you'll see these patterns of activation where cells are changing their behavior across the grid. They might evolve into like a single color pattern, or they might evolve into stripes, or they might evolve into blotches. And so they generate very interesting patterns. And of course, it's a generative model, so you have this ability to generate all sorts of things from very simple inputs. But now the question is how do you analyze that? How do you get from like seeing all these cool patterns to this, I can tell you what this pattern means, or what its implications are. And a lot of the Alife stuff is like that as well. I don't know if Anson's read a lot about like some of the early Alife experiments, where they would build like these machines. It's kind of like the von Neumann machines I told you about earlier, where they had these these agents that would maybe evolve different behavioral states, generate a bunch of things, and then would look lifelike, definitely, but it would be but it wasn't clear on what was going on exactly.
Yeah.
So, why don't I, while Jesse's getting ready, set up here, why don't I go through a couple things in the, well, let me share my screen. So I mentioned, and I don't know if I have, let's see, I'll look at it. Can everyone see my screen? I have up the Github Organization. So this is the Github Organization here. We have, how many members? 13 members now. There's Piyush, there's Jesse, Anson. And so we're getting members, and we've talked, I think, in the last several meetings about what we might do with this organization. We still have the old repositories, but this is sort of like a curated version of it. Okay. And so one of the things I mentioned here, so if you go to the Saturday morning NeuroSim repository, you have a bunch of weekly meetings, or a bunch of weeks listed. And these dates are each day we've had a meeting since I think I've gone back to August and gotten them up. So if you go to the README, you have from August to November 2020, these different dates. If you click on a date, I'll get way back on August 15th. And then we have our meeting notes here. So we have the meeting recording, the Twitter thread, which is, the meeting recording sort of put into a thread of different readings that, we follow up from the meeting. They might be things we talked about in the meeting. They might be follow-up things. Then here we have a presentation. So this is, I think, where we gave a net logo tutorial. So this was for agent-based modeling. And then the supplemental notes, this is one of the games that we talked about in the agent-based tutorial. And so there's a link to that. And so each week has all sorts of stuff on, the different things that came up during that week. So August 8th, actually, I believe, is when I gave that agent-based modeling talk. Or no, I didn't. But there, actually, here's a supplemental note to follow up on Cannon's Wisdom of the Body, which is actually has to do with homeostasis, and putting links to things like that in the supplemental notes. It helps us sort of recall what happened that week, and if we're missing a link, we can go in here and find it. Now you can add to these like supplemental notes if you wish. You just simply either edit the file. You can edit the file just by clicking on this pencil, or you can make a branch of this on your own machine and then issue a pull request. So you can change this document through a pull request. You can put in different things in the supplemental notes. And then we have these, and we can go back and say, okay, I want to go back to August. I think maybe something happened on August 22nd that I missed. What happened that week? We had the critical periods talk, this supplemental paper that we talked about. So we can go back and look at all that. We've been talking sort of informally about doing like a integration between GitHub and Slack, which would be useful if we could have like announcements from Slack, have links. The thing is, you can't really link into Slack because Slack is generally private. So you can actually have a Slack link. It generates a URL, I believe, but it doesn't necessarily let you go into it directly. I think if you have a Slack account, you can get into it, but if you don't, then it's going to be a little harder to do. But that's something that, I'm thinking about. We'll talk about it in future meetings, or probably in Slack, as we kind of come to this, get our heads around the system. But this is basically the system. And I think Jesse mentioned in Slack that it was maybe a little bit difficult to sort of, maybe they should be organized by year as well. So we should have like a year. That'd be a little hard to do, but I guess it could be done where these would be all put in like a year folder, like 2020 and then 2021 and so forth. But that's probably a good idea. Although, it could be where this README file is just structured so that it can be sorted like that. But we'll figure that out as we go along. But anyways, I think this is a good resource for people because we have a lot of people who are asynchronous. Like Piyush isn't able to make meetings. He might be interested in something we talked about. So there's the YouTube channel or YouTube link. You can watch the video. You can see the presentation. You can see what was on Twitter, just in terms of the readings, but there are also other supplemental notes that are maybe important that people have thought of during that time period. So there's a lot that we could potentially do. And this will just help us to not lose things. Because I know we talk a lot about a lot of things in these meetings, and it's hard to keep, on top of everything. So that being said, if we go back to last week's meeting, which is November 28th, who's in? Oh, Jesse has 2 instances. Okay. Hi, Jesse. Again. Oh, you're muted.
Hi. I don't know if it was my connection, but you cut off. I heard you were saying something, and then you cut off just 10 seconds before I rejoined.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
So I didn't quite hear the last thing you said.
Oh, so I was just talking about the this system. This is something we can keep talking about as we go along. And then if you go to this week's meeting, or last week's meeting, I'm sorry, November 28th, and this will be a recap for last week. So last week we had a presentation on Survey Cog Model, which was Jesse's presentation. And then we had this main 2020, just kind of prepping for that, which was excellent. And I think Jesse can talk more about that in a minute. And then this quote by Norbert Weiner, which is, let it be remarked that an important difference between the way in which we use the brain and machine is that the machine is intended for many successive runs, and that it can be cleared between such runs, while the brain in the course of nature never even approximately clears out its past records. And then, so we actually talked about this in another context, I think the week before, where we cited this tweet by Maxim Roginski. I'll go back to that. I think I have it on here. Where he talks about, like, oh, I guess I don't have it in there. But anyways, he talks about this idea of, in the McCullough-Pitts model, where they kind of talk about, like, how do you build this basic perceptron, or what became the perceptron, and, it doesn't really encode things in memory. It can encode one thing, but then if it encodes things, it has to forget them. I can't remember what the conversation was exactly, but it's this idea of, like, how a model might be able to encode a memory for one thing, and then, is it robust to further memories? Could it, say, for example, learn how to learn about a data set of cats, and then go and learn about a data set of cars, and then, like, transfer the knowledge between the two, or hold both things in the model simultaneously?
Yeah. I think the critique was that Dennett, he was quoting one of Dennett's books, and Dennett was saying, like, oh, well, he was talking about learning, and he was trying to correct, and I think he said at the time that Dennett may actually know what the critique was, but kind of in what he was speaking to in that passage to maybe a more general audience simplify things. And then I think Maxim was like, well, actually, they don't learn, and it's sort of like, it's the way that those networks were more like, they're tailored to one very specific purpose, and then that's it. There's no real updating after that's set. And kind of challenging that with, like, well, here's how this can change or be different. Does that seem right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there was a lot going on in that discussion, but yeah, that was definitely part of it. So yeah, it was. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to enable with this system are these reflections on past weeks. Yeah.
And I have, like, I put a whole bunch of stuff over the last 2 days. As a brief, I don't know. Good to see you. Good to see everybody here again today. Hi, Piyush and Anson. I know I talked to Anson earlier this week. My week has just been totally. I've been in, like, graduate school land for the majority of this week, and then the last day or so, like, oh yeah, I so many things I want to say here too. So it sounds like what happened so far. Anson gave an update about his stuff. And then we're talking about what we just talked about since I've been here. Is there anything I missed earlier this morning?
No, I think that was it.
Okay. Because I added, in trying to sort out the structure to this, it sucks because I wanted to be here earlier, obviously. But what I might do very quickly just to talk to this, and I don't know. I have a question. Were there any major presentations scheduled for today? Like, I have a few things that I was going to mention, but not like a big. I don't have anything like last week where I had like kind of an hour on a large project. So.
I was going to talk about I was going to go do a run through of the observer dependent models talk, but
okay.
that's I'm not gonna do a full blown thing. So I'm just going to go over it a little bit But yeah.
Okay, and then maybe some papers too.
Or, yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Because I don't. Ooh, it's already 45. Oh, and I'm rejoining the room. Okay. Really quickly, I'll just go through this then before that. By this, I mean the actual board because I added a few things here, and some we don't need to like go over again necessarily. The spreadsheet. This is tied into. This maybe should be tied into this whole discussion about the GitHub, and then I threw together something that I had an idea, and then it's like, screw it, I'll just put it together really quickly last night and show it here about some other stuff. I put something together for a Medium publication, and I don't know how much people feel are familiar with that, but I'll show you a little bit later. But this spreadsheet, this here may be the more direct question might be. Oops, I just stopped myself by hitting the wrong button. The more direct question here may be, what do we want to keep track of, and how do we want to automate it? I think maybe something that I'll do for next week is what specifically do we want to keep track of, because that will kind of structure our quote unquote database a bit more. Like, in one sense, I think maybe having why Google Sheets was nice as a, I don't know, output medium is that if you put everything into a spreadsheet, you can create some filters inside of it, like an Excel or whatever, and create these displays that might be more appealing or useful. But having everything go to one place and filter it out is sort of its own. There's plenty to think about that. I don't really want to talk about that right now extensively, but just why that's still in review. Like I think that will be something to follow up on later for myself to mention that here. Also, the expect videos are now available. I just wanted to mention that specifically because there was some really good stuff there, and they're now up, and I think we'll be going back to that. I will be going back to that. Between that and the Stanford HAI conference and the main conference, like, there's stuff I really want to go back and take away from all of those things. And this is also a side note, like, over the winter break, and winter in general, because I miss libraries and I miss a lot of interaction. I'm going to try to be creating either inside and or public facing more so, just some like video watching parties basically, or groups of like academic conferences to go back and review some stuff, because there's stuff. It always excites me when people actually do take time and go back and look at stuff. So there's a whole slew of stuff I want to do in that process, and we'll sort of deal with pandemic life in the winter. And again, more about that to come as well. But videos are up mentioning that. Great. Flash's Web Cafe talk, we'll be talking more about that later, so I'm going to pass on that for the time being. Agents. Frontiers in Artificial Life and Multi-Agent Learning. I think update the title here, but good job, Anson, on finishing that up for school. And I'd like to, I think that will be falling into a transition into, actually, I think there's a little bit more to do with that to present the work into a more further deliverable on the presentation, a blog post or something, or even kind of an article. Like that could be an article that could be put into some kind of a magazine somewhat too. So more about that to come for sure. But I'll put that, generally speaking, I might put that in this category now. That's still upcoming for the Cyber Cafe Scientific talk. I'm assuming there's really been a lot about that yet. Is there any updates from that, Bradley?
Not really. I haven't heard anything back. But we should still plan on doing something like, if it doesn't happen, say, we should still plan something out. And I think this thing you've been talking about with video watching parties might be, if we do this, even if we do it as part of this cafe thing, we might still add in a little bit of that, make it more experiential. like, yeah, I can't really think exactly what it would look like right now, but
Yeah, I have a lot more thoughts about that, and I'll get into that. I'll discuss that this week in Slack. I don't want to. I don't. There's so many things that could be covered today.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to it later today, but that's kind of a new idea. I've had ever since I've had such a stressful couple of weeks period, and then I got over the first round of many graduate applications that are totally done and finished and everything. And I have this like burst of clarity, and then this sense of structuring what's coming up ahead. So there's a lot of stuff that will just kind of be coming about that, and you know, much more to come about that. And then in the new business, I put a bunch of stuff here, and I don't quite know how to best go about that. If we're going to have Bradley's presentation about the observer-dependent model upcoming and papers later, you know, this is open to talk about how much you want to say now or not. There's a few, these first three are main related here, like just discussing it. There's a very specific thing I wanted to talk about that came up regarding epistemic diversity and also epistemological directories. The blog, which is the blog, this is a new thing too. The blog and note combination, which I would really like to encourage people to do, and also I want to continue to refine that. So this is all main stuff, which I'll talk about as one go. This one here, I would like to do a presentation. Oh no, this is a separate thing. Sorry, this one here. I just moved it. This here is sort of an idea that I had that might be useful in sort of a almost professional development sort of way, but I think as an early career researcher, I think that's a very good term to use, and that's what I'm definitely in that category. I think, well, and it does kind of go with the idea of tools, but it's sort of like meta. I think this came up as when in the broader context of what we're talking about note-taking, we're talking about not having things fall into the ether, the twirly birds, and whatnot. One of sort of the other sides of the coin is, what are the mediums or output arenas or environments that our notes or research and our creation, the content that we're creating, the academic research content we're creating, where do we put it? And you know, this isn't just, oh, what journal do we put something in, but like, oh, how do I understand what should this be, like a blog post, a very formal blog post, an article, a presentation in this lab, a presentation at a conference, a paper submitted at a conference, a paper submitted at a journal, like all of those things when I first came in, and to some extent now, but I feel like why I want to talk about this is like getting over the hump of, they all seem like a blur and just sort of kind of meaningless, and just, oh, well, of course, whatever the best thing I can do, I'll just submit it to that. But I feel like there's it may not be a top priority because everything else, but I feel like there's a need, or at least for myself, I feel almost very, if anybody saw at the main conference, Gunnar Blom's, I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly, Gunnar's post on his talk about Introduction to Writing Scientific Papers was a great, and I feel like there's a flip side of for lack of better terms, publishing scientific papers. or not even papers, but like there are many different in like a full in like fully, I don't know, super professional academic science. You have your research, you have a paper, and you put your findings in the paper and you show it at a very specific venue and whatever. But there's so many in between steps that are also valuable. And what do you do with those things? And I feel like just having a presentation where you discuss the ins and outs of that would be really useful for me and potentially other people, because I feel like under the umbrella of what we're talking about with the notes, with the Twilight birds, with whatever else, there's this sense of what can I concretely do? And or if you don't have a specific like medium outlet in mind or a way for it to gauge other people, and kind of what Gunner's talk started out with, like I really like this, and this has been actually been personally motivating in some ways, but like before this talk, so that I didn't bring up here, was really good. Like science isn't not finished until it's communicated, or he took it a step further, no work is actually done until like you're not finished. Or like what I thought about a few months ago was like you're not really completing the loop. You're not completing the circuit. Like you have this. Okay, you learn whatever, you do research. You have this. You find data. You interpret inside your own mind yourself. But you don't, like, where do you connect it to the rest of the world? Where do you connect it to, like, the scientific community, or to just put it out into the world? And I feel like that's a really great, like, tools of the trade discussion for anybody who's trying to do science. Because it's not real, especially now, more than any other time ever. Like, it's not just, Dr. Frankenstein by himself putting together some stuff in a lab, and then, this result happens that just takes on a life of its own and goes out in the world, which, was a monster in that case. But everything is so collaborative and everything is so many different stages of development right now. Like great stuff happens. There are papers that are cited hundreds, thousands of times that only ever exist in archive and aren't really fully published. Like that's part of the reality of where we are now. So I'm not saying we should all aim for unpublished papers on archive, as what we're trying to do here, but much more a sense of there's so many intermediate steps along the way and building blocks and blog posts and articles and presentations that build to the other things, and I feel like that's a discussion I never had at any point in my academic career. No one's ever really talked directly about what I'm studying here to me specifically. And I feel like I would like to have a discussion about that specifically. Just so, I don't know. I'll leave it at that, and we'll come back to that later for sure. And if anybody's interested in that, definitely that is a help wanted for other people to join that project or that presentation, or just be more interested about that topic in general. So it's a bit meta science and almost administrative. But I think it's a really important thing. And kind of related is the tools stuff. Like one of the things, I think this was Dr. Sola, and I think I'm saying her name correctly. Dr. Sarah Sola. Or was it Sawyer? Anyways, yeah, here it is. Oh, this isn't quite it, but in her talk, one of her talks, she talked about the importance of having tools, and just knowing your tools, and she talks in her talk quite a bit about I don't know, the importance of basic math and how math kind of superseded some things in computer science and even like neuroscience, whatever. To have fundamentals of math, you do a lot of other things with tools and knowing what your tools are, and I feel like having a tool section about, okay, well, here's what, I don't know, you could say like basics of Python, but also like we've done some things with contextual geometric structures, agent-based modeling. Like we have this tool set still going in the lab, but breaking them down even more things and just having what is a tool. Here's maybe a really basic overview of what it is and what it does, what you can do with this tool, and not necessarily like a full course on it, but just what is a tool, what can you do with it, maybe how we might use it in the lab, and just again a catalog of that. Not necessarily not really that essential, but this would be a really interesting collaboration idea with some people too. Like, I'm sorry?
Oh no, I just coughed. It's okay.
Oh, sorry. Like, part of me wants to work with a good friend of mine, Logan Thrasher Collins, who's an amazing guy, really smart, and he's like super into biology and bioengineering and modeling. And he's shout out to Logan for being great in so many words. But that'd be a cool thing, and maybe a lot of crossover with some of this has kind of been happening in vivo or in one form. So I'm acknowledging that here. There's oral plant. I don't know. This is a huge topic. I might just put that at the end. Just to quickly go to this. We'll go back to the main in a moment, and then we can jump into Bradly stuff. I think I misunderstood what this was from Danny said, and it was Dan Bennett or something like that, and it was the ACM computer intelligence, computer human interaction one.
Yeah, there's a workshop. Yeah.
So yeah, this is cool. You said this might be an outlet for some LS-Stages machine stuff. Oh, it's coming up soon. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
I thought I saw this in May. Like, oh, it's in May, but some of the deadlines are coming up soon.
I think there's a workshop though that I was pointing to. I don't know if they have a list of the workshops, but yeah, this I think to submit some work on to this. I think the chance is already passed, but I don't. Yeah, I think they're going to do it virtually, and there's a workshop on. I can't remember the topic, but it was. They usually have like a workshops list, but I don't know where it is. Anyways, it's in the Slack channel, and I don't know
Okay,
the
we'll
details.
that later. I just mention that. I'll put that there. Mention. Oh yeah, this is cool. This came up. This is also kind of came up as part of the main stuff. This is a cool thing. It was very much I don't know, the kind of thing I would do. They look back. They did kind of a past, present, future of NeuroNext, and 2016 version of that. It's kind of interesting because this actually was 2016 was sort of the year I went to my first like big boy academic conference on the ethics of artificial intelligence, also in New York City a couple months later. So this is really cool. I'd like to look at that later. But that's another one from the main. That came up in one of the talks, Jessica Tompkins' talk. Actually, adjacent to that. So yeah, I don't know how much to really get into these things, but I mentioned writing the structure. But I also went ahead and just to really quickly demo this right now. The folder structure maybe just because like it looks like it's by date, and I guess you could do each day by year. Like you could have, for everything that was December 1st, you could have just many different years of December 1st. So I was like, oh, the folder structure is a little bit weird, but I thought it kind of turned into where did it go? Here it is. It kind of turned into it's not here either. It kind of turned into a discussion about by the way, May 2020 has a job for it. Everybody should check it out. It kind of turned into this in so many words. So I don't know if people are familiar with this Medium publications deal, but I thought this might be an interesting way to maybe put together some of the stuff in the lab. I don't want to replace synthetic daisies at all. I think synthetic daisies is like a premier. It's a great resource on the site, and I'll just be the main thing. But for stuff like updates on the Saturday morning NeuroSims, putting that out here might be useful. This is all I threw together like super quick. This background will change and whatever. But like just to show, having something like this maybe would be cool to talk. Would be cool just to have. It's super short. It's really just a paragraph or two. What happened? Some news, like I kind of plugged main, and I mentioned our upcoming talk, and I mentioned the papers that we had here. You have a recording, whatever else. All the stuff that was in the GitHub repo that Bradley had. I probably might not have these here. It looks didn't kind of work out as well with just in this way, but I'll change that, whatever. And then just this stuff here, like just the embedded images really. I put that here in the overquote too. But it's just having this here might be nice. It might be a way to sort of have something a little more public facing and output there. At the same time, like I don't want to be too making public. I didn't put anything in this that wasn't already on GitHub, so it's not like I'm putting anything that isn't. Like we're fairly open in the lab anyway. Yeah. But just having a set of stuff here and maybe having some other update, you could have a whole category like columns in a newspaper sort of thing. And we would have one for Saturday morning news and one somewhere else here. So this isn't set in stone, but I figured, all right, I'll put that together just to demo it, and then we can talk about the use of that later or not. But yeah, a no-cost, easy thing to set up here was a Medium quote-unquote publication, and then we can use it as little or as much as we want in that sense. But it was interesting, it was actually a really cool way. We could potentially start off a meeting recapping what we did last time. We talked about all this stuff here. It's really actually kind of, honestly, it's impressive. Like, wow, we covered a lot of stuff. And it when you go to the meeting, it's sort of like, oh, here's an hour of stuff we talked about different things. And it's like, cool. But then, oh yeah, like we talked about all this stuff last time. We mentioned all these papers last time. And we have these cool images that came up last time. And, it's kind of cool to see in this format, and it's a very accessible one too.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and that's really easy. Like, I'm not saying this should replace the GitHub stuff necessarily. We could talk more about that later for sure. But just, I think for an outside user or as an intermediary point, that'll be sort of a good thing to use in that sense. So yeah, I know it's oral planning. Let me see. Oh man, it's already well into 11. The next hour. I might honestly just skip. I'll just say one thing about this. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of discussion in Slack. You can kind of see it here. A lot of discussion in Slack going on about projects for next year. I'm hyped about structuring some stuff and pursuing things. As you can tell in a lot of the things I posted here, There's a really fascinating amount of stuff that we could aim and tailor towards upcoming, and I'm not even going to try to talk about it here. But for project ideas and interests, please mention anything you'd like to do in Slack, because there's a lot of. I would like to get them to a place where even like we get to maybe have these like mini proposals and discuss the topics and say what we'd like to do in the year ahead, and also just that can easily be converted into some call for involvements, because there are a lot of people who are sort of adjacent to the lab or inside the lab, or who aren't currently active in the lab but would like to be, or have talked about, oh, I would like to work on X project, and it's like, well, if we put up a little and call for involvement about that based on some of the project ideas we're putting together, I think there's a lot that could really be done in that. So we'll come back to that later. I don't even know if how much do you want to talk about main stuff right now, or table to next time? Because I know we're kind of running short on time, Bradly. What would you like to do?
I think we can give like a 5-minute update. Do you have that link to the Medium blog? I really want to check that out.
Oh yeah, I could put that in the chat now. It's basically medium.com oral dash group.
Oh, okay, so, yeah, that's good. Yeah, let me give you some feedback on that. I love it. I think it's a great idea. And as for like the different types of publications, I actually have a lot of insights into that, but I haven't.
I bet you do. So yeah.
So maybe we'll do like a separate session on that even at some point soon. But
yeah, that could be like a whole like that could be like a conference presentation that we just make. and eventually submit to a conference. That's already a done deal right now, and I know like that's I know you have tremendous experience with that, so I would love to hear that. And then kind of my flip side as the young person is like, oh, how do I sort this out, and can bounce off of your experience in that discussion for sure.
Yeah.
So 5 minutes on main.
Yeah.
5 minutes on main. Wow, amazing. Awesome. I wish Rashad was here. We had many great discussions in Slack this week with Rashad and Bradly. Some other people outside of Slack was really amazing. Maine, Montreal, AI and Neuroscience. 4th edition. You know what I noticed also? Just to bounce. This means it kind of came out around 2016, 2017. 2017 is also when the first ever computational cognitive science came out. Where did it go here? This cognitive computational neuroscience. This is awesome. I'm 100% going back. This panel, this discussion that was referenced by Jessica Thompson. Her presentation, she had a super interesting presentation. I'm just going to jump right to her presentation right now. She started off talking about the difference between an artificial and biological network, which is a very, very technically based. It was really nuts and bolts. And then as it went along, actually, I have my notes here. Oh, let's throw back to this since we've been doing this. This is an experimental approach to taking notes on an event and then having the blog of the event down here. The blog is very much incomplete, but the framework is there. I'll be pulling it in there today. Be happy to have anybody contribute to the refined version, or just putting your notes in any different parts of it. But Jess Tompkins' talk here, Thompson's, excuse me, it started here, and then it started with, where did it go? Where's the, I missed part of it apparently. Oh, here it is. Let's make this very large for the time being. This is what her outline was about. It sort of started off with this very, very specific discussion about comparing methods and metrics within bio and artificial neural networks. Then interpretation of the results was her next section, and then led to like this much it concluded with this really great high level overview of what are common goals and how we get there. And I came in, there's much more to say about all this talk and everything else, but that's where this came up. This talk, and I'm a fan of many of these people, and I tend to like how Joshua Tenenbaum talks about these topics. I feel like he has a really good holistic take on what's going on. But there's a lot that came from this, and one of his comments was like, the starting point approaching from a different. I kind of likened it to people. There was an analogy of like going to Mars. And how do we get there? But I kind of like the analogy of like many different ways to scale a mountain, and what progress from each standpoint looks like might be different. And some are coming, up from this high level view or down from a lower level view. And I'll refer to this panel for a much better discussion about it than what I can do here. But that was really something. The conclusion to Jessica Thompson's talk, I really thought was a really great way to think about many of the things that we're doing in the lab, and as okay, these are they might seem kind of far removed from a specific gigantic overall goal of like fundamental laws of intelligence or some more lofty versions of that. And I think there's healthy debate about what does that even look like. Like maybe there aren't certain fundamental things in the way that physics is unified by some major theories, and or in the quest to one singular theory, as opposed to like quantum mechanics or classical mechanics and stuff like that. And but there's a lot there. So there's plenty to discuss with the main stuff. I showed off that thing that we're working on. More about that later. I don't want to. There's so much to consider with it too, but in the interest of time. And the last thing I mentioned about this stuff before training with Bradly was this, which I don't know if this came up in. We'll link it there. That kind of was a fail in betting that, and I just lost my place for that too. Oh, double suck. I wanted to talk about that paper. There we go. I wanted to mention. Where did it go? Epistemic diversity optimizes across desirable properties in scientific discovery. And I feel like that was just a very interesting I don't know. I won't be able to find it quickly. It doesn't matter. There was a great paper reference, and I think it might have come up in Jessica Thompson's talk as well. Basically, talking about how diversity of lines of inquiry is very useful for actually discovering core essences of important scientific problems. And it was a paper that was about that. And I feel like that's great in and of itself. And it's also really interesting in the concept of our epistemological directories macro project. It's kind of ways of, it was a way of like it's kind of a different meta science paper validating, having different directories and lines of approach that you document and explore and keep track of is really useful for getting to deeper and broader essence of things. So I think I better turn it over to Bradly because it's getting late, but we'll probably come back to this next time because there's so much that hasn't actually been discussed here. So I'll leave it at that. And yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your attention for all of those rapid fire updates on many things.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that's so those notes that you were taking. I noticed you put those in Slack. Can you make those available, like maybe on the Medium or some other way, or is that something you want to keep private? Or
Oh, I mean, they can be. I actually, for some of the things on Medium or elsewhere, I wanted to, like, I'll share this quickly again.
okay.
I, um, I am open to, because I don't know what people would like to do. Like I give a little bit of an intro here, but like my idea was for the lab, for in-house people, I would really like when we go to events like this, and this is something that I actually think I kind of it's part of my own idea, and then seeing I've seen Jeremy Nixon has come up a few times here. Like he's done this with he basically created an open notes document to go through AAAI's symposium series in the fall. And like, hey, you want to take notes on this together? Let's all, a bunch of colleagues and friends who are interested in this stuff. They just went through it, and people just filled it in and put things together, and like they were going through this and updated their own notes themselves. And this is obviously very incomplete on my part, and some typos are there. But I really, I would encourage anybody who's interested, particularly in the lab, but also otherwise too, if we want to go there. But fill out these sections. Just put some scrap notes. These are bullet points. These are quick notes. Obviously, I kind of just I took some screenshots for some of the things, just throw them in there. But like Gunner's talk was great. It is a reference on Cording's paper for writing Cording's principles and writing scientific papers. Great stuff here, and I would love to go over all this more later. But for the sake of this document, find a talk. Like I've done some very simple. Like here's a talk, here's a name. Put some stuff down there that if you're interested in put it down there, great. Also, I had a cool little discussion on consciousness on day 3. I'll highlight that here. Thank you, Danielle, for organizing that. But right here, whatever you want to do, and then what this will come into is like this will be refined stuff. This isn't. I kind of just put notes here. This is not really done yet, but a very simple. Again, imagine Medium. Imagine. Oh man. Imagine a finished version of this simply being here. Obviously, you're on synthetic basis too,
Yeah.
but just a simple version where you talk about this. And I was only going to put. I'm not going to extensively go in. Like I might list each talk, but then like I would go in depth. Like I really want to go a little, maybe a paragraph or two, on a paragraph, like a big paragraph on Gunner's talk, a big paragraph on Jessica's talk, maybe a big paragraph on Danny Bassett's talk that a lot of people mentioned here, whatever. Just not a lot, but just enough to put stuff there, and then get it, ship it back, send it back out into the site, to the universe, to the community, whatever, quickly. Not fussing too much with it, but just saying, hey, here are some highlights that were relevant to us. That's why I kind of want to have like an incomplete tour. Like I don't want to try to be exhaustive, but just a way to kind of go from our notes to a refined product and then get it out. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. But I don't know if people want to, do we want to have this document be totally open to the whole public? We can do that. I'm not averse to that. Do we want to have an open, hey, anybody can come along and on our, low visibility Medium blog post, list them as a co-author there too? Like I'm totally fine with that. But I don't know. I don't know what you guys would like to do with that. So.
Well, yeah, I think that's something we can discuss further if you want to, if Anson or Piyush want to have opinions about that, they can put it in the Slack channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can put it in the Slack channel. I think definitely something we can probably will evolve organically. So
Yeah. I know, Rashab and one of his, I don't know, classmates or colleagues at his university was doing it. I was working in one of their documents too, but then I kind of made this one just because I know it'd be easier for me to manage showing it in the lab here. But I know like Rashab has done his own stuff along those lines, and CC him in this discussion because I know he's been very active in it, and I taken some inspiration from him as well. So, yeah. I think this will be a really cool thing, a way to. It's not quite refined yet, but I think this will really help make it efficient and make more involved. I think this is a great. I think this is a good setup, and I think good things will come from it. Anyway, I think I will hand the mic over.
All right. All right. Thanks for that, Jesse. So yeah, we'll follow more up on it later. While Jesse was talking, I had a message in Slack from Piyush. He asked if we had talked about the Alphafold finding yet. This was something that happened in the last week. It was so there's this field called protein folding, where they've been trying to find the conformational structure of proteins using computer simulation. This has been going on for decades. They've been working on different models and trying. The big obstacle here is computational power. So you're folding proteins. You're basically making these three-dimensional models, applying physical force fields, and getting these conformational structures, and they're supposed to predict proteins. What this group has done, this AlphaFold group, they've been able to do this process using deep learning, I believe, and they've been able to do a very good job of. Yeah, there we go. And this is a grand challenge in biology, protein folding, and so they've been able to solve this problem to an extent that was quite impressive to a large number of scientists. This is based on interactions on Twitter, I think. I just saw it on Twitter, and I noticed that there were a lot of people who were very impressed, but also a lot of people who were skeptical. And so that's normal, actually, for a big scientific finding. But it looks like what they've been doing here is DeepMind is producing a solution to this. And again, like I said, the problem up to this point, and this is something that's come out of years of getting data from X-ray spectroscopy and things like that, where they actually take the protein and they image it, and they find the structure, and then they translate that into, a coordinate system, and then they build these physics force fields, which are not trivial, but they have to explain how the interactions in physical space work, and then put that all together. And people have done protein folding on supercomputers for years, but it's taken, they're huge jobs, and, they take, thousands of hours of compute time to get structures. And so that's the problem, and they've basically been able to simplify this. And so I think it's a very interesting topic. We're not prepared to talk about it this week, but yeah.
No, but I'm prepared to go over the website really quickly as Bradly talked about it, because this is really cool. So thank you for mentioning it, Piyush.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, if you want to read on it, I can put a link in the Twitter thread on it. But yeah, it's something that, it's not, the whole field, it's very hard to get into. If you get into explaining what protein folding is, it's, you can spend hours discussing it, but it's, the basic idea is they've solved a very hard computational problem using deep learning. And this is something similar to a lot of the combinatorial spaces that you might find in the brain or in evolution or in some other domain of research where you have spaces of large, combinatorial complexity. So this is what algorithms we've been trying to do with algorithms for a very long time, is to try to figure out better ways to search that space. So, yes, thank you, Piyush, for mentioning that. I guess what I'm going to do here, and let's see, we have, oh yeah, that's that link to the Medium. So why don't we do this last 20 minutes or so. I want to talk about a couple of papers quickly, and then I'm going to talk about this talk I'm giving this coming Friday, actually, to the Philosophers Web Cafe group. So everyone see my screen here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is, there are a couple of papers. I'm not really sure what I want to present in this group. This was something that, this is from Jesse. This is issue 13 again. This is talking about the things we can do in 2021. So there's a lot of stuff that we might want to get to, and we should discuss this maybe on Slack or in future meetings about some of these proposals. And some of these proposals could grow into like research or blog posts, or even like Google Summer Code projects, or even grants. So it's worth talking about. But actually, Rashab posted a paper in Slack, and this is something called "Is Coding a Relevant Metaphor for the Brain?" So this is a paper that I don't know if we've talked about this in the group before. We may have, but this is, okay, so the short abstract is, I argue that the popular neural coding metaphor is often misleading. First, the neural code often spans both the experimental apparatus and the brain. Second, a neural code is information only by reference to something with a known meaning, which is not the kind of information relative to a perceptual system. Third, the causal structure of neural codes, linear or atemporal, or it's linear and atemporal, is incongruent with the causal structure of the brain, which is circular and dynamic. I conclude that a causal description of the brain cannot be based on neural codes because spikes are more like actions than hieroglyphs. So basically, he's arguing that if you talk about coding, like neural coding, it's not an appropriate metaphor because codes have a semantic structure. They have a meaning, like, it could be anything from like Morse code to the Bible code, which is like, just finding a pattern of meaning in something, or like Morse code, which is like each symbol or, discrete thing maps to some meaning. And so, if you're talking about something like spike trains, is there a code, or is it just kind of like, something you're interpreting as an experimenter? Is it something that you're coming up with, but isn't necessarily something the brain is abstracting away from the actual spike train? So this paper goes through all this stuff here. He actually talks about Morse code here, and this is just kind of a sort of a basic model of semantic, building a semantic framework here, where you have an emitter and a receiver, and there's a message being passed, and there's this encoding and decoding of the message. And so, you can send a message, but if there's not meaning, then it's, not really, you can't really understand it. And so he goes through the history of like this notion of neural coding. And so we've talked about this in the group a bit, where we have these metaphors, and people use metaphors to sort of get ideas across. And it's sort of what we were talking about with Daniel Dennett. It's this metaphor, sometimes a metaphor can be very tortured and incorrect in terms of the facts, but it's very easy to communicate to people. So like, the idea of survival of the fittest in evolution. Evolution isn't really about survival of the fittest per se. There's definitely that aspect to it, but like that metaphor is really outlived like what the data suggest in a lot of cases. It's like people have this, they build their ideas around these metaphors, and so it isn't really like a fair description of the data. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. So that's the thing we have to think about when we apply metaphors to things. And then they mention like Kaufman Johnson, which of course is a cognitive science take on metaphors. And George Lakoff has talked about metaphors a lot. And he has a lot of, if you want to read more of his work, there's a lot there to sort of get at sort of the link between like our linguistic machinery and our cognitive machinery. Definitely someone we should add into the survey of CogSci. So it talks about this. So, I mean, my take on it is that you have this, these metaphors, and you have this idea of a code. And I'm not really sure, like, where I fall in terms of, like, whether a code is an appropriate metaphor or not. I think there's, like, a lot of technical uses of the word coding in computer science that you could technically, say, well, this is actually a computer science code more than, like, a regular code. I mean, the idea I have of coding is that, you have, like, this sort of abstraction of whatever it is that you're trying to capture. So like computer code is this language. It's a formalization or a representation of something in the machine that you're trying to make happen. So you're trying to take, the sort of the bits and the logic gates of the physical machine. You're trying to write a piece of software or build a representation that allows you to do a lot of things with that machinery. And so, there's this software code and it can be more or less efficient. And then, that's what you have to work with. So, I mean, there are technical meanings of code like that, which are probably, he gets into this a little bit in the paper, but I think this is something you probably argue for hours and never really come up with a good definition. But so these three elements, correspondence, representation, and causality, constitute the conceptual scaffold of the neural coding metaphor. It could be argued that the most technical work on neural coding only uses the first technical sense, correspondence, where the word code is used as a synonym for correlate. The use of the metaphor would thus only amount to an inappropriate but innocuous choice of words. So this kind of gets into, like, how they use coding in this metaphor. So, I mean, again, I don't know what the answer is here. And so in his famous critique of Skinner's behaviorism, Chomsky summarizes the problem with the improper use of metaphors. Skinner utilizes the experimental results as evidence for the scientific character of a system of behavior, and analogic guesses formulated in terms of metaphoric extensions of a technical vocabulary as evidence for its scope. So, I mean, this argument's been going on for a long time about, like, how we use metaphors, how we use different terms, and so it goes on. It's been going on for decades, and but I think it's worth thinking about when you talk about, like, a theory, or you talk about, like, how something works in nature. It's always, you can never be too careful about how you kind of represent that. And sometimes, if you think something is a great idea, like there's a really cool metaphor I want to use, that can get you in trouble sometimes, because then it takes on a life of its own, and so you have to be careful when you choose your words in publications. It happens to the best of us that you get, like, a really nice metaphor and it gets misinterpreted, and then there's like there are decades of debate, but that's not what you intended at all. So this paper is, I think, worth reading, just simply for reasons of understanding how scientific metaphors work, but also for understanding how coding in the brain might work too. This other paper, I found this interesting, this perspective. This is from Nature Machine Intelligence. This is Todd Gurekas and Alexander Rich. Lessons for Artificial Intelligence from the Study of Natural Stupidity. And let's see. So the abstract here is, let's zoom in on the abstract here. Okay, so artificial intelligence.
I thought that'd be a John Carper paper, because he talks about that.
Oh, yeah. the abstract is artificial intelligence and machine learning systems are increasingly replacing human decision makers in commercial, health care, educational, and governmental contexts. But rather than eliminate human errors and biases, these algorithms have in some cases been found to reproduce or amplify them. We argue that to better understand how and why these biases develop and when they can be prevented, machine learning researchers should look to the decades-long literature on biases in human learning and decision making. So if you, I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but there's a rich tradition of talking about biases, trying to think of the references right now. I can't, but there's a lot. Well, there are always these logical fallacy lists that people pass around about like the different logical fallacies you can make, and some of those include cognitive biases. But there is a more formal literature on cognitive biases that range from perceptual biases to learning and memory biases to attentional biases. So if you preferentially pay attention to something or you remember more salient things, those are all biases. And so in this paper, they examine 3 broad causes of bias. And this is, again, for AI and machine learning. So it's not really the same as this cognitive biases literature. But the first bias is small and incomplete data sets. So if your data is incomplete or very small and it doesn't represent the world in all of its diversity, then you are going to be biased in terms of how the machine learning system encounters data, future data. They're talking about training here, but I guess just experiential information is what they're really getting at here. The second is learning from the results of your decisions. So this is like where you reflect upon the decisions you make, and so you don't make, say, the same mistake twice. Now, humans are not necessarily great at that, but there has to be this reflexive process. And then the third is biased inference and evaluation processes. So there's this idea of making inferences, again, based on biased information or making biased evaluations and accounting for that. For each, findings from the psychology literature are introduced along with connections to the machine learning literature. We argue that rather than viewing machine systems as being universal improvements on human decision makers, policymakers and the public should acknowledge that these systems share many of the same limitations that frequently inhabit human judgment for many of the same reasons. So they talk about here a lot of these biases. Amos Tversky, who is one of the people who won a Nobel Prize on this idea of perceptual judgment biases, playfully referred to these as natural stupidity. So, the idea that that biases are often sort of stupid mistakes, things like that. So, it kind of goes through this literature here. Talks about Google flu trends, which is kind of an interesting a case study. Google flu trends was a thing that was really big about 10 years ago. And they claim to be able to predict outbreaks of the flu by looking at Google search results for different symptoms of the flu. And it worked great, like on a couple of cases, like an N of 3. But then as time went on, they found that it wasn't necessarily predictive at all of flu cases. And so you can predict, perhaps, in maybe every once in a while, if you have a flu outbreak, people Google flu symptoms, you have some correspondence between flu cases and the search results or the search terms. But in some cases, it didn't work at all. And so, this is an example of something where people think, well, this would be a very good idea and this would be a very good model of human behavior, and it turns out necessarily not to be the case. And so they talk about the dangers of small data, which is just basically the lack of input information from the environment. A few words on that. You have we always ask, how much data is enough data, in both, not only for like training for machine learning models, but also for experiments in science, like empirical experiments. And so this is an issue that comes up, can we make, say, like an inference about something? Can we run a t-test on something if we have a very small sample size? And it turns out that there are a lot of problems with making judgments about things from very small sample sizes for a number of reasons. And so this is, I don't know how robust the sampling literature is in machine learning. I think it's something, again, that's probably criminally understudied, because there is probably a good paper to be written there on, what kind of information do we need to have good training regimens for an artificial intelligence. Are there things like, with the protein folding example? I mean, we have a lot of data going into this. There's a lot of data that's been generated about proteins. But just imagine if we didn't have those data. If we just had like very sparse data on proteins and protein folding and the dynamics of this, could we actually achieve what Alphafold did? Probably not. But then the question is, well, how much data do you need? And how much is just kind of superfluous? I mean, how much do you need? And then how much just becomes like, data that you don't necessarily need to make a good prediction. So they kind of go through all this. So I think this is a really good paper if you're like, this is something that, thinking about like a lot of the pitfalls of machine intelligence and how to think about them. So again, this is another paper, and that's all I'm going to go into for the papers. I don't know. I'll just put a link to these papers in the Twitter thread and and put it in Slack so we can get access to those. But those are, if you have any comments about those, be sure to make them in Slack. The last thing I wanted to talk about today was observer-dependent models, and so this is a presentation I'm going to give at the Philosopher's Web Cafe, and I'll send out an email when we get the link to the meeting location. It's Friday. I think it's at 4 p.m. UTC, which is about 10 or 11 a.m. in the East Coast of North America. So it's that time frame. So it's kind of late in the evening for people in India, late in the afternoon for people in Europe. But if you can make it, please do. If not, I think we'll be on YouTube. This is something Jesse got me into, so thank you, Jesse, for this, setting this up. The talk is called Observer Dependent Models. And the idea here is, this is a talk I gave in the group a little earlier this year. And the idea here is that, we're kind of focusing on a series of different agents here. And they're all doing observation of the world. And so this talk focuses on the role of an observer, but from the perspective of an agent, not necessarily of a human or, whatever. So this is a bunch of different agents I'm going to use in the talk. You'll see that I'll put them in different scenarios in the talk, and this is a reference to the Pac-Man ghosts, so it's a obscure reference, especially to a lot of younger people. This is talks. I go into talking about physics and the role of the observer in quantum theory. So there's the idea of the observed quantum state and every other possible state. So the observer observes some quantum phenomena, and they actually determine what state is observed, which seems a little strange, but this is one view of quantum theory. This is the many worlds view. This is Hugh Everett who proposed the many worlds view, and so this is one example of how the observer is important. There's another example from cybernetics. So the Regulator theorem talks about the observer and how the observer has to have access to the full scope of a system's variety. There's a lot of talk about the variety of a system and the observer and all of this. I'm not going to get too much into that, except to say that it's an important part of second-order cybernetics. and that it involves feedback between the observer and then the world and its states. So then I talk about the Evergood Regulator theorem in terms of this internal model, which is a model of a system that's well regulated. So this is an example of an internal model in the brain where they're modeling some causal thing in the world, and in order for it to be well regulated, or for you to understand that regulation, there has to be this internal model. And then finally, there's this issue of self-similarity. So we don't think of self-similarity in fractals as involving an observer, but there actually is this observer aspect to it. So if I see something like this fern or these nested triangles, it's sort of my perspective on it that determines how I observe the fractal structure. So, I can zoom in or zoom out, and I can see different aspects of the fractal structure. And so an example of this is from the Powers of 10, which is something, it's about 50 years old, where they basically created this video, and you can see it online, where they zoom in from someone's hand out to the universe, and you can see that there are all these different spatial scales, and how things can be very significant at one scale but insignificant at another scale. And this is all has to do with the action of the observer. So, get into how a single observer acquires an object in the environment and what information is contained in the world. So I actually use this globe as well throughout the talk to sort of talk about a point of view. So the observer is looking at the world, which is a black box. Then we also know that the world isn't really a black box because you probably know something about the world. So it's actually something they call white box, which is where you know something about this thing, but it's composed of black boxes. So you know something about this globe. It's the Earth, the continents. But other than that, you may not know about the structure of cities or what's inside the ocean. So those are all black boxes. And what we think of is that the world is a representation of a system. The observer here is a heterogeneous embodied nervous system. And so then we think about viewing the world as an agent with all these different attributes and how they're taking in information about the world. And that's kind of what we're interested in. And then this is an example of where you're observing the world as a white box. You're getting feedback from that world. You're interacting with it. And you have all these aspects. You have a brain and attentional mechanism. And that's what, there's a relationship here between embodiment and this role of an observer. And so then talk a little bit about quantum Bayesianism. So this is the idea of one agent and multiple points of view, which we'll get into later. So, and I'm still trying to work out the flow of this talk. So some of these slides might move around. There's observer embodiment, which we talk about in a few slides back, where you have this body that has constraints. So your visual field is an example of this, where you can't see everything around you all the time. You can only see in your line of sight in this visual envelope, and depending on where you're sitting or what direction you're facing, it depends on, that's going to depend on how you view the world. So if something happens behind you, either you have eyes on the back of your head or you don't have eyes on the back of your head, so you have to turn your neck. And a lot of this has to do with visual illusions and things like that, which work because of our embodiment and our lack of being able to observe every single thing in the world. So an example of this is the multi-stable perception. We have two agents and they're engaged in this binocular vision, and they see in this pattern, they can see two different things, whereas in fact there's only one structure and you're interpreting in two different ways. Then we get into collective intelligence from visually guided swarms. And so I talk a little bit about this experiment where they have these agents that are engaging collective behavior, but they actually have a visual system that can see things in front of them, so they can see their neighboring agents and they can make decisions based on the state of their neighbors. And this allows you to model all sorts of physical phenomena with the swarm. We've done something like this in the lab. This is Ankit's work on Bradenburg vehicle collectives, and how, if you give them like attributes, like, the ability to sense their environment, but collectively they can form these swarms around a stimulus. Then you get into Shannon information and the difference between that and Gibsonian information. And Gibsonian information, of course, is something motion that provides information. So we've talked about Gibsonian information in the group before, but there are, a couple attributes to this. So we think about Gibsonian information as this sort of an observer embodiment, but, quantifying a lot of the things that exist in the environment. So, there are all sorts of things we can look at, like disjoint distributions of the stimulus, contingent action, and coherent movement. So the first is disjoint distribution of things. So these two, this white noise field here is distinct from this field where it's static. It's not because of the information, the Shannon information, it's because of the Gibsonian information, where there's movement here. As stochastic as it is, you can still model it as a disjoint distribution. Contingent action is where you have two videos where in one of these videos some frames have been taken out, so it impacts the sort of the smoothness of the action in the video. But this is the principal contingent action, so we can measure each frame as one of these nodes being contingent upon its previous frame, the previous frame of the previous action, and so we can quantify this tree based on how this action unfolds. And then coherent movement, where you look at like the movement of particles or agents or whatever it is in your environment, and you can see differences in terms of how motion is continuous and how it's aligned with the motion of things around it. So there's a difference between this stochastic motion here of these balls and this coordinated motion of this flock at the bottom here. And so we can characterize that using coherent movement. So that's about Gibsonian information. Then I want to talk a little bit about touch and multisensory observation. So these are a bunch of Bradenburg vehicles exploring the world. And they have, you can model that as a series of things, sensory inputs on both the front sensors and the wheels. And that's, I can talk about that a little bit. I have to think more about how I'm going to talk about some of these slides, but and then I'll talk about the genotype to phenotype mapping agent. And this is where there's an agent, and this is one of the papers that we wrote for the NeurIPS workshop, where you have these agents that have different levels of sort of biological complexity underneath this perceptual agent. So you have a genotype to phenotype. You have a genotype here, which is a model of a genotype. It's like a genetic algorithm where that gets expressed, and then that builds onto some sort of tissue, that builds onto some sort of organ, and then builds onto an organism. And that affects how perception works. This is pretty abstract if you look at the agent, but this is the principle that we're using here. And so you can build agents that are related to one another or identical in terms of being clones, but they can have variation in how their genotypes are expressed. And so you can also use these agents as an array to view things from different angles. And since they're clonal, they have this similar genotype. And then, there's variation in the phenotype, but there's also variation in what they're observing. And so then I talk a little about intersubjectivity, which is where you kind of get into this idea of agents sharing information to, form a common understanding of it. And ties into third-order cybernetics, second-order cybernetics. And then there's this idea of argumentation theory where you're, trying to figure out how intersubjectivity is accomplished through a bunch of agents. So these agents are all viewing the world from different angles, and collectively they can put together that there's a globe, that all these different parts of this circle are stitched into a globe, and that's sort of the goal of what these agents are doing. And they do this through this sort of coordinated perspective taking. I'm just going to mention that here. I'm not going to propose any more than that, but I do want to get into that topic a bit because it's a philosophy group. Then I have this whole section on what we call morphogenetic agents, which are something I presented in the Devorm group, where we have these agents that are both morphogenetic, which are these emitters, which produce a pattern, and then observers who observe these emitters and then try to reconstruct the patterns and identify the patterns. And so these two different types of agents or versions of the same agent can co-evolve. One exhibiting morphogenesis, the other exhibiting perception. There's a link then between like these spatially restricted shapes like banding patterns or stripes and intentional mechanisms in the perceiver. And so this is where the emitter is trying to transmit this pattern, but it's doing it cryptically. So it doesn't really show that process, but this perceptual agent is trying to figure out what this pattern is. And so it tries a checkerboard that's not right. Then it tries these stripes, and that's right. So it's able to do these sorts of adversarial types of learning between the two types of agent. And you have this basically the stripe generator versus random pattern generators. And the observer has to determine between the two and use feedback to get the correct answer. Finally, then I talk about these things called viewpoint networks, which are these where a bunch of agents in a population observe these complex shapes, these complex networks of geometric shapes from different viewpoints. And so this is an isometric projection where you have basically it's a two-dimensional shape that kind of looks like a three-dimensional shape, and these agents will come to at different points and view it from different angles and try to put together a coherent interpretation of the scene. So agent A will take vantage point V on a projected geometric object that forms graph G, this graph here, and then you just have a bunch of agents doing that. Each AN takes a particular viewpoint from this population, resulting in a heterogeneous set of perspectives. And then those perspectives are put together into a whole across the population. And so you can try this with a Mobius strip. I'm using this Super Mario Mobius strip, and these agents are taking different slices across this Mobius strip. It helps you approximate the angle and the location of things, and this is how these agents will be able to interpret this, not as some sort of weird two-dimensional artifact in Flatland, but in fact this thing that has like some dimensionality to it, perhaps high dimensionality, because it's a Mobius strip and we don't really know. I mean, there's some fractal structure in it, and so can we approximate a global state sensitive to locally specific features or the context? And so this is an example of an agent, it taking a slice across this Mobius strip. This is what it's seeing, and then these agents collectively can build this these conceptually connected subspaces in phase space and then put them together that way. So this is, again, future directions are these viewpoint networks working out this idea further, talking maybe some work on more work needs to be done on the epistemology of clusters or natural groups, or the epistemology of plenitude, which is all possible natural types. And so we've done this in the group with contextual geometric structures, which represent the cultural world for a particular set of natural features. So we've kind of done this sort of decomposition of epistemology in contextual geometric structures. So then that would be thank you for your attention. I mentioned Saturday Morning NeuroSim, and I mentioned the MetaBrain Models project. And that's it. So I know we lost Anson. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I kind of screwed up the timing for this week's meeting.
It's okay.
But no, I look forward to talking about that, and I think I'll go over the slides with you in Slack because I'm not quite sure between that and Like, I know Charlotte wanted me to host, I guess. I'm not quite sure what she has in mind. I should look at some other stuff more beforehand, probably.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh.
okay. That's well, we'll do it in Slack, and I just wanted to go over it, and it probably took longer than it needed to, but I'll have to maybe I'll cut a couple slides out or whatever, but we'll take care of that offline, I think.
Yeah.
It's okay. Well, thanks for attending. I know Piyush and Anson had to leave, so that's okay.
Yeah. I think there's anything else to wrap up here beforehand. I'll just be talking about everything in Slack.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it in Slack.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
See ya.
Talk to you later. Bye.